All right, it's John Vance here with you, and you've been with us other times that we've talked to Nick and Terry, and we've had some great conversations. These conversations are really like just sitting around, having some coffee, and shooting the breeze about some stuff, and then we drift into leadership issues. So if that floats your boat and you're interested in what the chief's thinking or why chief officers make the decisions they do or some of the things that you may have to think about as a chief officer, these might be some good conversations for you. So that's a little preamble to what this very casual conversation that's going to end up coming in your way about every other Thursday is all about. So this is Leadership Thursday with John Vance, Terry Garrison, and Nick Brunacini. So what we've done is we had a little podcast called The Chief's Challenge, and we're moving that over to the B Shifter channel, which is where you're listening to it right now. And on Thursdays, we're going to talk about leadership issues. So if you've got a chief officer, you are a chief officer, aspiring chief officer. You don't have to be a chief officer to listen to this, actually, but just more of the higher level issues, a little more on the strategic level or the day-to-day business level with myself, John Vance, Nick Brunacini, and Terry Garrison. So every so often on Thursday, we're going to drop in on you and talk about this stuff. And, the big thing to talk about is Terry Garrison, one of our co-hosts, has retired from his job as a fire chief to devote more time to spreading the knowledge to other people. So I'm congratulations. I'm very, very happy for you.
Thank you. That's why I retired, to spread knowledge.
Spread knowledge.
I love it. I thought it had something to do with working for the government.
Well,
After 45 years and plus 2 in the Army, which makes 47. So 47 years of government work, it's like, man, I think I've had enough. I've done my deed. So great department, great people. The Glendale Fire Department's a great group of people, and they'll move forward without me. But it was time for me to retire. I didn't want to become the really goofy old guy in the corner. I thought if I'm going to be the goofy old guy, I'm going to spread it with everybody. So that's why where I'm at now. But I'm officially retired from a full-time job with the government.
Well, congratulations. I'm happy for you, and I'm happy for us because we're going to be able to spend more time doing stuff like this. So tell me, what was your last day? Was it a Friday?
It was a Friday, yeah.
So how was Monday?
It's weird because everybody says, what are you gonna miss? Or you're gonna miss the people, and I do miss the firefighters, but I get to stay connected to them. They're not far from where I live. I miss the staff people. I had some really good ladies that would work as hard as any firefighter works for the firefighters, and I miss them. But the week went by pretty fast, actually. They wanted to throw me a big shindig, and it's like, no, I don't want that. Let me go out quietly. And they said, no, we're not going to allow you to do that. We got to do something. So they did. So we kind of bartered, went back and forth bargaining, and ended up with a couple-hour luncheon with a piece of cake and not too many presentations. But I didn't want any presentations, but they violated that. They wouldn't let me do that, leave without something like that. So it was nice. It was an opportunity for firefighters to come by and say bye to them. I'd visited fire stations over the last month or so, trying to say bye to everybody. It was no surprise I was ready to leave. There's never a good time to leave as a fire chief. In fact, many times it's like going from offensive to defensive. Some fire chiefs get out about 2 minutes too late, and they should have got out a little bit earlier. So I've been fortunate, but so I left the job, and I still talk to them. I'm still connected to them. They haven't hired another fire chief yet, and I kind of was hoping they would go with an inside guy or somebody within our system here. And I don't know if they're going to do that or not, but it's hard to leave a group of people no matter where you're at. Even if you're, moving across town, it's hard to say goodbye to your neighbors and, hey, we're moving over to this side of town. So it was a difficult decision. Actually, it was, I'm going to change it. It was an easy decision to leave. It was a hard decision of when to time it, but I was pretty much ready. I need to focus on my family and my grandson and myself riding bikes or working out or whatever, and then hanging out with Nick and you over here at B Shift. There's an opportunity to come hang out and spend more time here, and that was really a bonus.
We have a lot of cool stuff that is on the burner, and I wouldn't even say back burner because you being retired now puts it on the front burner. So there's going to be some cool stuff coming up. We'll just leave it at that, and hopefully get it out soon, and so more to come.
So it's interesting. So we're here at the CTC, and Nick and I, you were training a group of people today, training the trainers in Blue Card. Nick and I were sitting in his office on the first floor, and I'm on the couch, and he's behind his desk. And the students were leaving the classroom, and one student put his head in, and he goes, "Hey," he goes, "You know what's so cool? I'm not making this up. It happened 15 minutes ago, right, Nick?" Mm-hmm. He said, "You know what's so cool?" He goes, I took your guys' leadership, or I took your guys' tactical class 20-some years ago. You guys were co-instructors, and to see you guys sitting in there together just made him happier than hell. But it's absolutely true, right, Nick?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Then he went on, he says, and I took your intro to fire suppression class before that. Oh my God, you still have a brain that works. That's amazing. Because we would set the room on fire, and whichever student got out would get an A, and the rest we buried and gave them D's. I mean, it just wasn't, we couldn't stand to flunk them. I mean, even the dead deserved at least a passable mark.
They paid their price of admission.
They did. They paid for the credit. So,
and that was community college?
Yes, 100%.
That's awesome.
Which is, I could teach in prison next.
The way it worked in Phoenix is that the tactics class, whoever taught that had a lot of power in the system, because the tactics class, Brunacini, thank you, was tied to the captain's promotional process. So we would kind of teach the things that were going to happen, and decision making and risk management, all those kind of things it took to be a captain. We would teach them in tactics. So Nick and I came up in the system, and I worked so it was kind of a hand-me-down system. Is everybody, when they were getting ready to promote onto assistant chief, they would pick their next person in line, and then that person would pick who they wanted to teach with. And I worked with a guy named Dennis Dote, who was a great instructor, who selected me when I was a battalion chief, and then he went on to something else, and then I got to move up to the number one spot, and I got to pick Nick as my training partner, and that was just awesome. I mean, the best fun I ever had.
Wasn't Dennis Dote the chair of like the fire science college after that? Isn't that where he moved to?
Yeah, the Phoenix Community College system had, they taught EMS and they taught fire science, but they taught it over the umbrella of fire science. And he was the chair at one time. And he followed a lady named Kay Lewis, who was an incredible emergency nurse. And she taught most of the paramedics in the valley for 20 plus years, and she ran the program. When she left, and he took it over. We had about a year ago, we had some sort of going away for one of some people like big going away parties, and we had a big one at our fire department, and Kay Lewis showed up, and I was happy to see her. She had to be, like maybe my mom's plus age, but she was still out there and getting along.
Oh man, she used to. I liked her. We got along very well, but like once every 6 months, she would call me in her office and threaten to fire me for something. Says, "You cannot say this in class anymore." I said, "Well, Kay, it's true. The Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. I'm not making things up." She says, "Nick, that doesn't fit into your curriculum anywhere. Don't talk about the Second World War anymore."
Random thoughts about Nick Brunacini.
Yeah, exactly.
But she was tough, man. She called me in a couple of times, and she said, "Terry, shut the door behind you." And I was more afraid of her than I was of Brunacini. She was tough. She was going to straighten you out right then and there.
Well, then you had Dennis Dote. Dennis Dote was a BC at Battalion 2. So I was a captain in his battalion. And he was one of the few BCs that I really enjoyed working for, because he kind of understood what we were there to do. And anyway, and he got promoted to shift commander. So and it wasn't a shift commander yet. So he goes downtown as the ranking guy. And I remember that Bobby Begay had come into Station 11, and he couldn't. Cantwell called us and said Bobby Begay can't answer the phone anymore. And I said, okay, I'll take care of it. So I bring Bobby in. I said, Bobby, you can't answer the phone anymore. Why can't I? I said, well, because the mayor called, and if you keep answering the phone, they're going to fire me because that's my job. You ain't got to know. So he goes off and he goes home, right? And he calls Battalion 2 to tell Bob Taylor at the time that he's the devil. Well, Bob Taylor isn't there, and it's Burwell Putnam. And Bobby leaves this long droning message on Battalion 2's answering machine about, you get the devil out of your head and you ain't firing Nick Brunacini. And so he's playing my lawyer. So I get a call. It's the start of B shift, and I go in, and the phone rings, and it's like 7:30. It's Burwell Putnam. Hello? He's screaming at me, top of his lungs. Is that man there? What man? The one, that houseboy you keep. I said, oh, yeah, he's here. I'm having him arrested right now. And I thought, oh, okay, that's interesting. Why? He left a threatening voicemail on our machine. All right, so he goes off and does his thing. I tell Bobby, listen, you got to go home for a minute. We got to figure some stuff out here, and then you can come back.
Go across the street.
Yeah, so he goes across the street. He's got a stop sign. He stops all the traffic, and Bobby's at home. Burwell shows up to the station. He's got the answering machine. He's got the auditors, and so they're playing this tape. And it's like 30 minutes, man. He fills up the whole recorder. He never hangs up, and he just keeps talking, and it's hysterical. And you're like, oh, my God, this is like a comedy show. If I could put this on the computer now, the entire Phoenix Fire Department would be hypnotized by it. And so Kenny Johnson starts going on and representing Bobby with Burwell. And so I get up and I leave, and I call Dennis, and I say, hey, listen, I tell him what's going on. He says, oh, Jesus Christ. He says, I'll take care of it. So anyway, I go across the street with the auditors. They tell Bobby, hey, we're sorry for the interruption. You're fine. You can go back to the station. Everything's good.
They saw who he was.
Yeah. And in fact, the auditor says, I wish these morons would stop, all this nonsense in the morning. And I thought he was talking about Bobby. I said, hey, pal. He says, no, I'm talking about Burwell. I thought, oh, okay, perfect. We're on the same page then. Bobby comes over. Burwell leaves. Burwell's pissed off. We make arrangements. So I tell Bobby, Burwell's going to be back. You have to go hang out with Dennis today. So he goes to Battalion 1, right? And he's hanging out with Dennis Stote, the shift commander. We have pissed off Burwell so much, he goes back to his quarters and he calls Battalion 1. Who answers the phone? Who was exonerated that day? Uh-huh. Yeah. You ain't got to know. Dennis Stote talked to me today. And that ended I never heard another peep.
So you talk about leadership. So you talk about leadership in like we were just talking about earlier about how you treat everybody, right? Bruno used to say, the deal about be nice, you got to be nice to everybody, right? You just can't be nice to the people you like. You're nice to everybody. Well, we were all nice to Bobby Begay, and only the bullies were mean to Bobby Begay. I mean, it was obvious when you met Bobby Begay, he had a medical problem. I mean, he was probably 7, 8 years old mentality, something like, maybe a little older.
Maybe 11. Yeah, maybe B shift
level. He could ride a bike.
He was B shift level.
Yeah, B shift. He was a typical B shifter, but
he knew the buses, man. He'd get you around on a bus.
And everybody that was mean to him paid the price somewhere along the way. They thought they were going to be mean to him. So I'm sitting in the fire station one time, Station 11, and Bobby Begay's there, and he kept getting on the intercom and singing. Well, Bobby sings about as well as he talks. And he's singing and singing, and Kenny Johnson, the jokester, he was an engineer there that was funnier than heck. And he says to to me, he says, "Hey man, we got to get him off the intercom. You can't let him on the intercom. He's driving us all crazy." So I'm the fire captain. I'm going to try to be the adult. So I told Bobby, I said, "Bobby, come here." Yeah. I said, "Don't sing on the intercom. You can sing all you want, but don't do it on the intercom." "Oh, you ain't going to know that I'm going to sing on this intercom." I said, "Please don't sing on the intercom." I didn't push it. I wasn't mean to him. I just asked him not to. Immediately, he got back on the intercom. But when he was done singing, he called Rita Brunacini, the mom, the wife of the fire chief, the mom of Nick. He calls her and says, "You ain't going to know Terry Garrison's being mean to me, won't let me sing on that intercom." So we're all sitting around the station about an hour later, and somebody says, "Hey, Terry, the phone for you." And I said, "Okay." I pick up the phone. I go, "Hello." She goes, "Terry?" "Yes." "This is Rita Brunacini." "Hello." So I said, "How can I help you?" She goes, "Don't be mean to Bobby Begay." I said, so I'm thinking, she's thinking I'm one of the bullies now, right? I said, I'm not being mean to him. I asked him not to sing on the intercom. She goes, "Well, Terry, don't be mean to Bobby Begay." And I said, "I'm so sorry. I'm not being mean to Bobby Begay." And for the longest time, I thought, oh, Rita Brunacini thinks I'm one of the bullies because I picked on Bobby Begay.
I think she was just screwing with you, Terry.
She might have been screwing with me too.
I'm gonna go on.
But yeah, so from that, you know what? I sang with him.
You know, the last time I think my dad, my brother, and I were together was at Bobby Begay's funeral.
Yeah.
It may have been.
How long ago was that?
I don't even know, Vance.
Yeah, how old was he? He was young, Bobby.
If you want to find out more about Bobby Begay and more of the stories, B Shifter, the book, has quite a chronicle of the exploits of Bobby Begay and Engine 11, Ladder 11 folks, Station 11. It's good. But like, Terry said the other day, every fire department has the same 10 people. Mm-hmm. I'm convinced every fire department has a Bobby Begay because...
Oh, we had dozens of them.
Yeah. I mean, my fire department's always had somebody special from the community that comes by and visits. And one of the guys' names was Buster. And we used to give him hand-me-down uniforms. And he would ride his bike up to the fire station, then back it in like the fire truck. Except this was a very busy road. And we used to say, "Buster, you can't back in like the fire truck." And he would always fire us. He would say, "No, you're going to get fired. I'm going to fire you." So
Bobby prayed for us.
Oh,
he would grab you around the neck, and he was extremely strong. And he would try to get the devil out of your head by doing a headlock to you and praying for you. And that was his thing. Hope you never had a Cookie Monster.
No.
A Cookie Monster was a very friendly woman around the fire department 100 years ago when I was first hired, and that became problematic. But those are probably out there too. She was a lot more dangerous than Bobby was. Talk about leadership challenges when you get the phone call and it's the Cookie Monster. And she wants to talk to somebody. It's like, oh my God.
Now I know where you're going.
She shows up to the station.
Yeah.
You got a leadership challenge there. So you're right. There's the same cast of characters in the fire station, the same cast of characters. Who was the little woman we had that kept calling at Station 11? She lived about 3 blocks down across the street, and she would call us just because she was lonely, and you'd show up and she's in there, and we would go to her, and we were always nice to her. She had a little puppy, and she had a stick, and she couldn't get out of bed or couldn't get out of the chair much. And she seemed very nice to us, but she had that stick real close by, and that dog had a bare spot on its ass from where she would hit it with that stick every time it came by. And everybody's got one of those.
We had ours lived at the shelter on Van Buren that used to be a Holiday Inn, and she was blind, and she lived on the 2nd floor, and she played the piano, right? And we went over, and we would always be called because like she was going to be having a seizure. So she had this aura of having a seizure. And every time we went there, the downstairs neighbor was there assisting her with whatever her medical condition was. Well, after a little bit, we came to figure out it was more than just a welfare check. There was some type of physical congress going on between the two that became very obvious the more times we went back. I mean, you couldn't miss it as you walked in the door. It hit you like a wave. Mm-hmm. oh my, this smells like copulation.
And candy.
Yeah, exactly. And then, and so we figured out what was happening is the husband was blind too. So what they would do is if they heard the door, they called 911, and that was the thing. She was having a seizure. So we intervened the best we could without spilling the secret. But this isn't really kind of what we're here for. We're not marriage counselors. Yeah, we're EMTs, ma'am. So, and Kenny would get her to play the piano and sing. So it provided a break for everyone in the thing. That was usually good for one song. Everybody was fine, and then we could leave.
If you could have taken Bobby there to sing while she played.
Oh, yes, that would. Terry, see, that's why you were the chief and I never was.
Bobby, come with me.
Exactly. Yeah, you're going to be our auditor on this one, my friend.
But like you said, there's an entire cast of characters. The play is set in every fire station. The 6 or 7 or a dozen guys, the chief's personalities, there may be 4 or 5 of those, the firefighter personalities, the customer personalities, and that's kind of what we're going to get into moving forward.
It's Shakespearean.
That's what Nick and I are, that's why one of the makes it easy to leave one job is to get excited about the next one.
Mm-hmm.
Got firefighters that retire and they really don't have anything to do. Back to the original question, they get kind of goofy. They start, I think that what they do is what I found is they look down at their hands, and that's where they start. And then they start picking at those scabs, and then they move up their body until they find every medical condition that they ever thought they had or should have. They spend a lot of time worrying about themselves and going to doctors and creating new problems. But if you leave one job to go to another job, like I got to here with Nick and you, is that, man, I'm excited. So we're going to put together some leadership classes and really talk about that cast of characters and kind of how to work with them.
I think it's so important to have something after retirement. I see so many guys too. They retire and either their entire identity was wrapped up with working for the fire department, so they lose their identity and they freak out, or they just quit doing stuff and they become a vegetable. I mean, they just, that's when the medical problems and the brain starts to go and everything else. So to stay engaged in something, whether it's, I've known guys who they retire and they become golf pros or, the Rangers or whatever, and keep active out there. I think that's a key to thing. But what you're going to do is keep active in the fire service and stay engaged in things and start bring some of these leadership lessons, just like Nick has been doing, especially with B Shifter and Blue Card since he retired. So
no, it's going to be fun. And
it's crazy. Talking about this is the main focus for a firefighter's mental health is kind of the PTSD piece of it, it's kind of the nasty stuff you see throughout your career. And really, to be honest, and that's a thing. But I've never been haunted by those memories. The thing that concerned me the most before I retired is watching older guys that were getting ready to retire. Oh, yeah. And it's almost like you're getting booted out after a life sentence in prison. And it's like, I can't go back. I mean, I'm done. Once you retire, you got to find something else to do. To me, that seemed to be the biggest mental health challenge that firefighters faced, was the end of your career and separating away from that and then figuring out who you were going to be next. Because like you said, Vance, I think there's a lot of us that they get wrapped up in that. The guy whose place I took at downtown at the end of my career there, Bob came back to see Bev one day, and I got to shoot the shit with him. And he'd been retired for about a year. And we were never really good friends. We knew each other, but I mean, he was a C shifter and I was a B shifter. But before we left, he said, "Hey, man, I need to talk to you about some stuff." And that was it. He says, don't ever leave here. I said, "Well, why not?" And he says, "It sucks. It's horrible. It's the stupidest thing I ever did." He says, "I was in charge of a whole shift, and now I'm in charge of nothing." I thought, well, you get to do what you want all day. He says, nah. He says, I bought an RV, and I go fishing when I want. I eat steak every night. And I said, well, that's your problem. He says, what's that? I said, you bought a vehicle you could take a shit in. No, I mean, what, that's supposed to make you happy? Come on, Bob. He said, see, exactly. That you did it right there. He says, no one else would say that to me other than a goddamn fireman.
Right.
Well, it's true. I mean, come on. I'm not a boater guy, and you buy a fish at a fish restaurant. So, yeah, but that was it. And he was pissed. He was not happy about his decision to leave.
A lot of wives aren't happy with firefighters' decisions to leave, right?
Yeah.
And something about when we first get on the job, there's a mental clock in all of us, and even more with our generation, is that firefighters were doing 25 and they were out, right? Mm-hmm. Now it's 30 and out or whatever, but there's always that mental clock. So you got firefighters retiring in their 40s. When I left Phoenix the first time, because I thought I was able to stay with the drop, but they ended that for us, is I was 49 years old. After 30 years in Phoenix.
Wow.
It's like, well, I got to go get a job.
Yeah, I was the same age when I left.
Yeah. So you just look at that and it's like, no other profession do people retire, maybe cops, but retire in their late 40s or early 50s and leave. And now you got to figure out what you're going to do.
Well, you went on the road as a fire chief, and when I say on the road, you went to Oceanside and Houston.
Yeah, I couldn't hold a job.
Glendale. But in a way, when you're a chief like that, and I kind of feel like the same way because I moved states. I've been a chief now for 9 years. It's kind of like being a football coach, right? Where you come in and you have your systems and you want to coach everyone up and get them going in the right direction. And for some people, that really works out as a good long-term, there's guys who hang in that job for 15 or 20 years. There's others, especially if you're fighting with City Hall all the time, that wears you down. And, you're 5 years, 6 years. I've had some peaks and valleys in my career, and there's been a couple of times where it's like I'm ready to pull the plug on this. I cannot go on because of the anxiety that is being caused by the elected officials. It's the firefighters. You can always, that's part of our job, dealing with people and coaching people and getting through those personnel challenges and stuff. That's not a big deal as it is dealing with people who change jobs every 4 years. So somebody, decides they're going to be a city council person or a board member or whatever. Now, fortunately, right now, we have a great city council. They're very supportive. But, I've had some past people that weren't, and that drives you crazy.
Well, and you're right. And so there's a couple dynamics even before that. So when you have 30 years in a job and then you decide to take a job out of state, so you're taking your family with you, right?
Right.
So that doesn't always work out well. We got to California. California is a wonderful place to visit, but where we lived, it just wasn't a lot of fun living there, believe it or not. It just was, you couldn't go out and eat in a restaurant at 6 o'clock at night because they're packed. There's lines around every restaurant all the time. So that became a problem for us, and then you kind of miss home back in, believe it or not, miss Arizona. So you got the whole family dynamics of that. But you're right. So Bruno said it best, right? You don't really quit your job, you quit your boss. Mm-hmm. And you do get tired of fighting. And you show up and, especially for us, you love the firefighters. And Bruno said that. The first thing you need to do if you want to be a fire chief is you got to love firefighters. You got to be supportive of your firefighters. I don't think every fire chief does that. I think some of them might love the power. Some of them might love the bureaucracy, believe it or not. Some of them might want to be a part of that. I never quite was able to fit completely in with the next level up. Like if I was going to have a beer, I was going to have with the fire captains or the chief officers. I wasn't going to go have a beer with city council members or the city manager or anybody like that, or even the HR director. Actually, the place I just left, the HR director, I'd drink a beer with him. But in most places, you're not going to hang out with the rest of them. And really, you take the fire chief job to be a part of that team. And for me, it's like, that was challenging the whole time. Sounds like you got a good group where you're at. But so, yeah. And then, in a place like Houston where the mayor has a 6-year, they're termed out in 6 years, and the next mayor comes in and they want a new police chief, new fire chief, new city attorney, new water director. They get an entire new team. But I think your analogy of being a head coach for a football team for a fire chief is a really great analogy. And Nick's used that before too. And, they seem to adapt to that, right? Mm-hmm. those NFL coaches seem to do it, but yeah, it's a challenge. The thing about it is, I tell people before they go and take a fire chief job somewhere, make sure you really like that place, because when you get there, regardless of how you feel about the politicians and the city managers, when it's time to leave, you're going to miss those firefighters, and you're going to hurt their feelings every time if you're doing a good job and supporting them. And that's our job, right? Bruno used to say the best bosses are validated by their workers, not by their bosses. So fire chiefs get validated by the firefighters. The city manager, if he gave me a poor rating, I don't care. The firefighters give me a rating because I'm supporting them, not because I'm bending over and doing everything the firefighters want me to do, or kowtowing to the, how do you say that word?
Kowtowing.
Thank you. To the union. Not because of that, but because you're supporting them. The number one job is to support your firefighters and make sure they're safe and make sure they take care of their customers. So it hurts when you leave those guys. It really does. It's like no matter how you feel going in, you think, oh yeah, after about 6 months, you're going to have a relationship with those people that you're like, oh man, I hate to leave these guys. Right?
Yeah. Well, I have 4 direct reports at work. One of them is an assistant chief who died over the summer. You know, he's active guy, Jim Flanders, rest in peace. And so I've been doing his job and my job. And there's a lot of things he was doing that was operations oriented that we gave to operations. So he kind of had his hands in everything. So we cleaned that up. But the guy was doing a lot, so trying to keep up with everything. But I have you going through my head, Terry, every morning when I stop by the kitchen to get coffee and there's firefighters in there, because I'm working on the budgets and I'm working on emergency management, all shit they don't care about, right?
No.
And it's like, you know, there's like, oh, chief, what do you got going today? I mean, there's a couple guys who always ask that, just in a real pleasant way. And I have Terry in the back of my head saying, don't tell him you're working on the budget. Don't tell him you're working on the budget. Because you said they don't care about that. But it's like, I've been pretty much locked in my office doing admin stuff because all the battalion chiefs have been busy doing orientation for new firefighters. And our deputy chief was out having surgery, and it's been me all by myself in the office with the administrative assistant, making sure everyone gets paid. The unsexiest job in the world, but if people didn't get paid, you'd hear about that. That'd be the first phone call. Yeah.
If you tell them you're working on a budget, they're going to assume you're cutting their budget. That's the first thing firefighters, right? Oh, what are you cutting, chief? No, I'm not cutting anything. We're good. We're going to keep going. But, we have some fire chiefs, and being a fire chief is kind of lonely sometimes because, and I'm not complaining about that, but I'm just saying that's kind of the job is if you're kind of an operationally minded fire chief like I am, the city manager and we have to talk a lot about he wants to cut, and I don't think we should, 4-person staffing around here. We spend a lot of time arguing about that. So when I leave there, it's like, hey, I gave my point, he gave his, but it's like, we're not going to go out and have lunch together. But there are fire chiefs I heard in the past that they'll meet with firefighters and they'll tell firefighters, hey, I got a hard job, guys. You need to support me. Well, that's bullshit. The fire chief's job is to support you. Mm-hmm. You should never, you don't tell your kids, and I hate to use analogies of firefighters as kids, but you don't come home and tell your kids, hey, man, it's really going to be hard this month. You guys are going to get a new baseball glove or whatever. You wouldn't do that.
We're shopping at Aldi's, kids.
Yeah, your mom and I, you don't know how hard it is to live with that bitch. I got a hard job living with her, guys. You don't do that. Right?
Mom and Dad are going to get divorced. That's what that'd be the next
Christmases.
Thing. Yeah.
So it's a hard, you got to walk the line where you want to be positive, right? With your role as a fire chief. But you don't want to lie to them either, the troops, right? Yeah. When the times are hard, you gotta admit, hey, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna go through some tough times with this city manager. He likes to decrease staffing. I'm gonna support it, support you guys, and keep our numbers up. But it's gonna be some hard times coming.
What was it? Vinnie Dunn, latest book, he talked about operational decisions make sense and political decisions make no sense. And as the chief, it's your job to keep the troops unfettered with all the political piece because it's just gibberish, basically, is what they said. There's no rhyme or reason for it. There's no operational solution to a political problem. They could give a shit. Those two things are disparaging, which is the problem with politics, probably, to be honest with you.
Well, what happens when the politicians get involved with Vietnam, right? That wasn't that long ago. It's like the generals weren't running it.
Well,
they wanted to, but
look at all the ones since then. I mean, they never went very well.
So, I don't think we have a lot of politicians listening to our show here.
Probably not.
No, I wouldn't think so. No. See, that's in my mind, the hardest thing of being a fire chief, especially in a bigger system, is because the fire chief is not necessarily the most powerful one within the fire department, as there are other people, politically at least. Yeah. So the most powerful political person in many communities are union presidents, especially of public safety unions. So those folks are operational, but they have political jobs that they do. So they're somewhat schizophrenic that way. But here, when the fire chief retired, the union president was hosting the mayor, who was separating from his family. So you had a situation where you had a brand new fire chief, and then you had the union president who was living with the fire chief's boss's boss. So basically the union president would tell the mayor, do this. The mayor would go to work and tell a city manager, who would then go tell a fire chief. So it was kind of a weird pecking order that you had. It like you said, like I said to begin with, it was political in nature, so it didn't make sense to the rest of us that were, because you thought, well, there's two people in the fire department that are in charge of all this, but they're not clearly making their decisions on behalf of the rest of us. This is more geared towards what they are doing personally.
You know, that's why labor relations are absolutely important, right? The fire chief and the union president, if they get along and they understand their roles, right? And at the end of the day, the fire chief's got the veto vote on fire department issues. The union's position on pay and benefits, God bless you, go out and get more for them. All boats rise. We'll all make more money, right? When the tide comes in. But so what I've told the union president that I worked with recently, he's a really good dude, is that when it came to I'll just keep on 4-person staff, and I don't know if I've said that on this podcast before, but my job was defense. I would go in every week and I would talk to the city manager on why we need to have 4-person staff and why we need to continue 4-person staff. If you've got 3-person staffing, continue to fight for 4, but you got 3. I don't think you're less firefighters for that. You just have to fight fires like I asked Bruno once, how do you fight it with 3? And he goes, you fight the fire like you have 3 people. Don't try to fight it like you have 4. Because when I went to Oceanside, they had 3, and I'd left 4. And he goes, yeah, fight it. Develop your SOPs where you have 3. I mean, that's the way you do it. But back to the union piece is that I would tell the union president, dude, you are the offense. I'm the defense. I fight every day to keep what we have. You have the political power to talk to the people who are the elected officials who the city manager reports to. So if you got the elected officials behind 4-person staffing, they could actually go talk to the city manager and say, knock it off. That would be wonderful, right? So it's all about numbers with with policy, right? The politics. It's all about who has a majority. Does a majority support firefighters? Does a majority not support firefighters?
You know, it's crazy. This is John Madden, the NFL football coach. Madden football, the video game, right? So they're building this video game, and they say, go to John Madden. He knows the most about football of anybody alive right now. And so he's talking to all these tech people who could give a shit about football. They make video games. And this is primitive. This is 25, 30 years ago. So they're making icon deals. So they go from one generation to the next. And John Madden comes in and they said, hey, you know, this would be a lot more exciting game and a lot more fun to play and a lot faster if we didn't have 11 on each team. if we could have like 4 or 5 on each team, and then the processors will work better. And, so they're looking at it from there. John Madden said to him, it ain't football then. If you want to do that, you can do it, but we're not going to call it John Madden football anymore. There's 22 people on the field. So they said, okay, so making video games, okay, we got to keep 11 because that's how many football players play a game together. Everybody that's ever looked at this said 4-person staffing is the gold standard for fire department operations. Company work, this is the way this works. All their SOPs, all the task level shit we do is based on having 4 people. Supervisor, engineer, 2 firefighters. This is just the way it's set up. That's what firefighting looks like until the political people said, no, they would have told John Madden, no, we're going to have 2 people. That's what it's going to be. And we're going to call it football. And we're going to fire you. And we're going to hire somebody who's a mouth breather that'll represent what we want him to represent, because that's what we're looking for. So we will elevate some politician into the rank of fire chief to gut this. That's a kind of a stupid little way to go about it, but that's...
No, that's a good analogy. And here's something. And if you are a fire chief and they're looking at hiring a consultant, drop me a line and I'll help you out, okay? I'll give you some tips on that. There is the ICMA consultants that come in, and they're going to consult for the city manager. And the ICMA will do that time study. You might know the name of it, but it shows how many hours a day the crews are really working.
Unit hour utilization.
Yeah, thank you very much. So when they see that stuff, 20 minutes. You guys only had 20 minutes of activity or whatever it is, they downgrade it. Well, why do you need all these people? So that's when they start arguing. And that's why data, like fire chiefs have to hop on board with data and really account for all the other stuff that we do every day, because I'm pretty sure that our crews are working 8, 9, sometimes 10. I mean, we're pretty busy for the amount of people that we have on duty. So I wouldn't be worried about unit time utilization right now, but it's something that's always been in the back of my head for that justification, because they'll try to hammer you with that.
No, and what else they do is, because I've gone through this for several years now, is they'll talk about call volume. So maybe you don't have enough call volume. Call volume and unit hour utilization has nothing to do with what you do. Well, like Nick says, when the game starts and you approach that fire ground. That's 4-person staffing. So what they try to do is they try to confuse you with the workload throughout the entire shift and try to interject that. That has nothing to do with what you're actually going to do when you get on the fire ground, what the captain's going to do, the engineer, the 2 firefighters, the battalion chief, their driver, that entire effective fire force that comes behind that initial units. That's where fire chiefs got to go. If they try to pull you into the hour utilization or they try to pull you into call volume, don't allow them to do that. Bring it back to actually what the actual job is on the fire ground, and use the NITS study, that's the EMS study on how you work through ALS type calls, use the NFPA standards, use all that. And they'll tell you, well, that's a standard, that's not a requirement. Yeah, okay. That's a standard.
Right now, you and me talking about it's a standard, not a requirement. We go into a courtroom, boss, we're going to see what the defense does to us with your standard, and how they use that as a peeler to take our skin off of us.
Yeah, so just bring it back to the fire ground, bring it back to the EMS call. So really focus on the customer. So this is how we impact the customer in a positive way with this kind of staffing. And I think response times are important. So response times are critical. And that's when you get into maybe the call volume piece, because if you don't have enough fire stations or units, you're out on other calls. Now your response partners from another area have to come in there. The response times start kicking up. Like in Phoenix right now, I think they're getting up to 9 minutes on their initial response time because they're so incredibly busy. But that's a different conversation. That's capacity. Well, this is actual work.
Well, the reason they're that busy is because they haven't added any resources to the system for 12 to 15 years. Yeah. And then the call volume's gone up 40% or whatever it is since then. See, and all these politicians that watch that happen could give a shit about that because it wasn't a news event for them. It did not reflect on them poorly at all, so it was not an issue. And they see this as, oh, no. Right now, what I read in the paper for fire service is overtime. Everybody needs $5 million more at the end of the year for overtime because there's not enough firefighters. And so what we have now is a forced march. No, you have to work. Well, if I was starting my career, I'd say, thank you very much. I'm done with this one. I'll go somewhere else. So I'm an indentured servant. When I sign up with your organization, I got 48 on and 24 off. No, that's.
I'll tell you a wonderful story about that. And I know Houston's doing something different now as far as their staffing. They have different staffing levels. But when I got there, there's one of the concerns that the Mayor Parker had was that, Chief, we're spending too much money on overtime. Okay, we run the numbers, looked at it and said, right, our staffing level is too low. We don't have enough staff because the union provides them with this much time off for this, which it's a wonderful contract. Mayor, you signed it. Mm-hmm. They get this much time off for this much time off for this. They get to take sick leave. They get this day off, and they get to do that in an agreement that you signed in a way that you signed. So we need more staffing when they take advantage of their benefits that you signed. We have to pay overtime to fill their spots. It took about 2 years of hard rock mining, and finally she says, you're right, we need more staffing. We hired 300 plus people. If you hire people and staff, overtime will go down, right? Mm-hmm. And you can't, and that's a conversation with city manager, you can't eliminate all overtime because then you'll be overstaffed. There's a sweet spot, right? And I don't know if you figured that out in your organization, John, where your sweet spot is. But what you do is you look at the contract, you pull it out, and you see how many members you have that you have to staff every day, whether, say you have to staff 50 members every day to cover all your apparatus. And then you look at the contract and you say, well, look, based on this contract, we're allowed to have 17 people off on scheduled leave and we probably get another 10 off on unscheduled leave. So then you figure out the factor you need to determine what you need for support to bring people in.
Yeah.
Right? You got
rovers, right. Having a number
either
of rovers.
Rovers or really because people are off every shift.
Well, right? It was interesting at the end of my career is there's an MOU between the city and the union. And like you said, the senior staff of the organization negotiated that with the union. And they said, here's the agreement we have for leave and all the other stuff, pay, salary, the rest. So part of that was sick leave. Well, the union, a million years before that, had negotiated the benefit that you could get paid for your unused sick leave. So that made it a tangible benefit for the members. And then it was very clear of what sick leave abuse was, is you could call in 5 times a year and be sick, up to 2 shifts in occurrence, and you didn't need a doctor's note. So essentially what happened is our executive staff said it is okay for you to be sick 10 shifts a year, as long as you do it no more than 5 times in 2 shifts in occurrence. If you do it 6 times, you got to get a note from your doctor. If you go 3 shifts, you got to get a note from your doctor proving you were sick. Otherwise, that's what it was. We get a new fire chief, get a new personnel chief who's angry about something and says, you're going to enforce the sick leave rules, and this is how we're going to do it. You're like, I didn't sign the MOU, sweetie pie. So, no, I'm not. That ain't my job. You signed this, I didn't, and I'm going to enforce the rules as they are. And I talked to the union about that. They weren't too sure. We're not too clear on this yet. Well, okay, you need a better rep. But it was, so organizationally, the same group of people that said this is okay come back and say, okay, we've changed our mind about this, and now you're going to fix it. And you're like, right. No, I don't think so.
And our city manager, there are city managers, I don't think he did this, but there are city managers who complain about firefighter sick leave. So we had a city manager complain about the Glendale Fire Department. You guys are using too much sick leave. Well, let's see how much we're using. Let's use data. I'm fire chief. I got data guys. You know, what do we got? we looked at us compared to the rest of the valley, and we were way below on our sick leave use. We're not abusing sick leave. Our guys are using sick leave when they're sick. And by the way, the job that firefighters do exposes them to a lot of shit. They're going to get sick.
We had a system when I got hired that our sick leave average dictated whether you got overtime or not. So if our sick leave average was at the same or below city, when you worked an overtime shift, you got time and a half. If our sick leave average was above the city, we got straight time.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was a pure ass negotiation from the time I was hired. So this is a system I grew up in. City manager says, I'll never pay a penny for sick leave. Unused sick leave, that's mine. We had a smoking union at the time. And what they did is they got the mayor and the council elected. And guess what? About 3 years later, we started getting paid for our sick leave. So it was a negotiated city benefit. See, this is what democracy looks like.
Yeah, you want to have fun with that is look at, when you start really looking at staffing, is look at the rest of your departments within your jurisdiction, whether it's the other city departments. And the fire, you'll be surprised, firefighters will use less sick leave than they use in HR or water department or any other department. But do that comparison. And then the discussion is, why are you paying a lot of overtime for them? Well, because when they call in sick, we just don't staff that desk, or we don't staff that garbage truck, or we don't staff that police car. Exactly. But you have to staff the fire engine. That's staffing. It's not an overtime problem.
Yeah.
It's a service delivery model where we need 4 people on every apparatus.
And I would say in my experience, and I've been at departments over 100 and right now a department at 91, I've had to tell people to go home. You know, or the BC says, hey, Jimmy's sneezing and coughing and hacking and, you know, well, send him home. Tell him to take a sick day. I mean, number one, don't get the rest of us sick. Don't get the patient sick. You know, he has sick time. He's earned it. Why is he here? You know, I've had the flip side problem. I've only had a handful of people, and usually they're people who have something else going on, like a abuse problem, substance abuse, family issues, or something like that. It's usually, at least in my experience, not, I'm going to make this a 5-day weekend. You know, that very seldom happens.
No, in fact, you talk about that when you have somebody who gets himself at the next level of discipline, pull out their personnel file and see how much sick leave they have, and it's related perfect. They have none.
The guys that they called you for, they said, Jimmy is whacked. You got to come get him. You show up to the station and Jimmy's in ozone land. Take him and get him tested. You go through the whole food chain with him. And he ends up off duty and then retires. You guys are right. They got 0 leave. They've always cooked it down to nothing. And they will not collect more than 6 pension payments before they're dead. I mean, it's a lifestyle choice they made. That the fire department ain't going to fix that.
I think that was part of back when Bruno was the fire chief. They had firefighters helping firefighters. So if you were a fire captain or even a member of a crew, and you started noticing one of your crew members was sick a lot, you probably can assume that something's going on in their lives. You ought to probably check in with them and see what's happening. And the worst thing you could do, if they had some sort of a abuse problem, is to ignore it.
Yeah.
Right? Help them out. Yeah. I mean, and it's not tattletelling or anything like that, but you got to try to engage those people.
And those are the people the system was built for, because they're going to do past the 10 shifts and the 3 occurrences. That's the only way you can get your leave down to nothing at that point. So you're like, no, there's something going on. And every one of them, like you said, they had stuff in their file that was, no, you've got to, these are unacceptable behaviors. But that's a tough nut to crack once if they don't fix it themselves, they're going away.
Yeah, you can't. You got to. Yeah. But, like Bruno says, sometimes you got to give them a hand up and show them to the door.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you a hand up.
You're good to them, too. Yeah. You're like, no, man. You're just blunt. You say, this ain't good. You're going to end up dead. And they look at you like, who the hell are you to tell?
And you just tell them, I don't know what you're going to do tomorrow, but you're not going to do it as a Glendale firefighter, Houston firefighter, whatever. And I wish you luck, man. But I hope, more importantly, you get off whatever the hell you're on.
Yeah.
For your family's sake. And then you'll hear about them later, and it's never I shouldn't say never. We've had a couple people that have kind of gone past that, but it cost them their job. That was rock bottom, right? Before they kind of bounced back up. It's a hard bounce. Usually costs a family and all kinds of things.
Yeah, and a great job. I mean, that's the unfortunate part. But a lot of times those folks maybe shouldn't have been in the job in the first place, because the job is I've seen a couple of guys where this job puts undue stress on them, or just, that's the reason why they've drifted towards the substance abuse and some of the other issues.
Man, I always had more stress on my days off than I ever had on my days on. Yeah. I really did. I love going to the fire station as a young firefighter and a captain, battalion chief, all that. I get it. We go on bad calls and we get to you. What I heard, now we're on a roll here, but what I heard is talking to some Glendale firefighters before I left, is that, they used to go to a bad call, whether it's a baby in a pool or some horrific accident or some crazy thing that occurred, and they go back to the kitchen table and they'd all kind of talk about it. What they do now is they go back to the kitchen. Even before they get back to the kitchen table, they got their phones out and they're looking at whatever they're attached to, whether they're buying a car or whatever it is, And they don't go back and they don't kind of talk about those, and they don't debrief and go through all that kind of stuff that we got to do, right? We would talk, it was the dark humor stuff, right?
Well, every time I had one of those, especially as a BC, you would do after action review of the thing. And so depending on what it was, there was one incident where, like, the mom set the kids on fire type of a thing. So you had a first alarm. It was
bad.
It was an unpleasant call. And it was around the corner from Station 9. So we figured, okay, we got everybody transported, the rest. And so we put everybody out of service and said, just meet back at Station 9. And because the cops needed to do all the cop stuff, and then they were investigating. So we really just went around. We got everybody in a room like this and just said, okay, you were there first, Engine 11. What'd you do? And Autry Cheatham said, well, we were coming back from the hospital, boom, boom, boom. And then Ladder 9 got there. And so we all just told our story. And they're like, and so at the end of it, I said, all right, we had 4 victims. Mom set all the kids on fire, the 3 of them. Only one that lived is Mom, and she was the most screwed up of the whole group, just doused herself. Said, from the moment the call was dispatched, 2 minutes later, Engine 11 was there. They're coming back from the hospital. 3 minutes later, the fire was knocked down. 4 minutes later, they did this. So like 26 minutes into the incident, we had fire control, fire was done, and all 4 victims were at the hospital or en route. Who else could do that? I said, it's us. That's it. That's the only people who could do this. And in fact, I've worked here a long time, and this call went the best of any call I've ever been on. So we did that. Well, okay. I said, now, pretend we were all off today. Look at me crazy. I said, we're all at home sleeping in our bed still. That still would have happened. This horrible thing would have still happened. We just would be innocuous to it because we weren't there. Mm-hmm. So I guess we can feel pretty good about ourselves. We got up, we did what we were supposed to do as well as anybody can, and now we're finished.
Nice. So we just took a trip, right?
Yeah.
We just took a trip. Would you be able, if you had to track where we just went, John, being a very, probably the smartest guy in the room,
no,
where you got the best shirt, if you could, and that makes you the leader. If you had to track where we went through, could you actually say what we just talked about? Could you say we started with retirement and we ended up with PTSD and firefighters who may or may not?
What did we learn here today, kids? Well, we learned about retirement, and we learned about some budget things and overtime. Effective response force. I think people should write that down in the notebook, because that does matter a lot more than response time. That's getting X amount of firefighters on the scene within a prescribed time in a percentile, like 80 to 90% of the time. So that's the measurement, gold standard measurement. We talked about Bobby Begay a little bit. And
be nice to everybody.
And be nice to
managing
everybody.
Station visitors.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's been a good episode.
It was great.
Well, and don't forget, we talked on the very front end about, retirement, and that is a change in life. So like Nick says, man, have a plan. talk to people before you decide to do it. And really,
Yeah.
and we care about you after you leave too, right?
Right.
It would be interesting to follow a group of people and see, like, the group that retire because they have something else they got to do. I mean, we all kind of fall into that thing as we got other stuff that's pushing around. So versus the ones that, okay, this is when I'm going to retire, and then I'm going to buy an RV, and I'm going to do this, and so they get kind of bored. And versus the ones who do nothing. I mean, just they got no plan.
Here's one thing, and I've actually talked to some fire chiefs about this before because I hear from their guys, and they might be neighboring fire chiefs or within my organization as chief officers. Don't give your people the countdown. And I know people who have the countdown. That's like, okay, I've got 368 days, 54 hours, and 12 minutes before I retire. and they give you an update every day. Well, what's that say to your people? I mean, your people should know you're going to retire when you give your notice. And don't count it down for them, because you're saying, like, okay, I'm bugging out, like your point before, that hurt some firefighters' feelings when you leave. Yeah. When I left my last job, I know it hurt some. Probably a few were happy, and there were some that were sad. And you just don't want to count down like this is a miserable place to be.
No, and the other thing is, you got to be careful with that too, because that was probably one of my most difficult departure decisions, is when to tell everybody. And because if you tell them too late, you abandon them, right? Mm-hmm. If you tell them too early, then that just causes a lot of stress for a long period of time. So there's got to be a sweet spot in there somewhere where you say, hey, I'm leaving in 2 months or 3 months or whatever. It can't be a 2-year countdown, and it can't be, hey, next week when you guys walk into this office, don't look for me.
You guys are screwed because you're fire chiefs. Well, I didn't tell anybody. I just left.
They still think you're there.
Yeah, some of them do. In fact, they're still hiding.
Well, it's been a good episode of Bee Shifter. Thanks for being here, Terry, Nick, and we're going to do these Leadership Thursdays every once in a while. And if you're just interested in sitting around having coffee with us and commiserating, you're welcome to join us on these Thursdays on Bee Shifter.
I like this approach where we just start talking about crazy.
Yeah.
I was telling Nick, this kind of reminds me of last night on Monday Night Football. I went to ESPN2 and watched the
Mannings. Those
Manning
are great.
brothers.
I love those.
And
guys.
I thought that was going to be kind of goofy until I started watching with my grandson, and I had the best time. I was laughing on my couch, and they were saying stuff like regular guys say, like, look at that arms on the umpire or on the referee. Look at those things. Why are they so built up? He did more curls than you today, didn't he, Shannon?
Those guys are funny. They're great.
Yeah. So that's kind of what this felt like to me today.
Yes. Right? We should review incidents or something next.
Well, join us again.